everyone and welcome back to our podcast video. I'm Ainur as your monitor. Today we will be discussing about an important constitutional topic which is the doctrine of separation of powers in Malaysia. We will be explore what the doctrine means and how our laws operate and how the key institutions like the legislature, executive and judiciary that function within this system. With me today are our three panelists. Let's begin.
Hello everyone, my name is Abigan Anakida. First of all, thank you to our moderator. Today, I'm going to talk about what is the doctrine of separation of powers. Basically, the doctrine of separation of powers is a framework that divides government authority into three main branches, each with its own core function. First, we have the legislature. This is which is responsible for making the laws. Then there's the executive, which administers and enforces those laws. And last but not least, the third one, we have the judiciary, which interprets the laws and ensures justice is always being upheld in our country. The whole idea behind this structure is to prevent too much power from being concentrated in any single body. By dividing this authority into three main branches, each branch can keep an eye on the others, creating a system of accountability and checks the balances. Next, I also will share about the influence of the Westminster system. Malaysia's separation of powers is indeed influenced by Westminster system from the United Kingdom. So, here we can see that several familiar features. First, the executive is drawn from members of parliament, not separate from it. Next, the Prime Minister must command the confidence of the majority in the Dewan Rakyat. Next, and Parliament remains the central law-making body. However, we should know Malaysia's system is not a carbon copy of the United Kingdom. We also have some notable differences. One of the differences is the executive in Malaysia tends to be more dominant in Malaysia's political structure. Secondly, judicial power has at times faced certain constitutional limitation. And we also have the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, whose constitutional role adds a unique dimension not found in the British model. So, overall, Malaysia practices a modified Westminster model, which one that blends traditional British elements with our own constitutional features and political realities. So, this doctrine is really important. Last but not least, I will tell you guys why is it this doctrine matters and important in our country. Well, even with Malaysia's modified version of the Westminster system, the core principle will always remain the same, which preventing the concentration of power by dividing responsibilities among the legislature, executive, and judiciary. The framework will always ensure checks and balances. This will protect democratic governance, guards against abuses of power, and this will always maintain the rule of the law in our country, Malaysia. So, while our system may not follow pure separation of powers, the spirit of doctrine, accountability, oversight, and balance will still play a central role in how our government functions. So, all in all, Malaysia is a country.
Thank you, Evigan. So now we understand the concept of the doctrine. Let's move on to how laws actually operate within these doctrines.
Thank you, moderator, and hi, my name is Nuhana Shakira. For my part, I will explain how to understand the government functions. We must look at how laws are created, interpreted, and enforced within the framework of separation of powers. Let's begin with how a law is made. The process usually starts with a bill, which is a proposed law. It is introduced in a Dewan Rakyat, goes to several stages, which is first reading, second reading where debates happen, community stage, and lastly third reading. If it passes, it moves to a Dewan Negara for other round of reading and voting. After both houses approve the bills, it goes to the Yang di-Pertuan Agong for royal assent and is then gazetted as an act of parliament. Next, let's look at how laws are interpreted. This responsibility belongs to the judiciary. The court interprets the meaning and the application of law when disputes arise. For example, if someone challenges a government action, the court will decide whether that action is constitutional or not. This judicial rule is extremely important because it acts as a check on the executive and legislature. Court can strike down laws that go against the constitution, and they can stop government action that exceed legal boundary. Now, let's move on to how laws are enforced. This is handled by the executive branch, ministers, and the government departments like Ministry of Home Affairs, Royal Malaysia Police (PDRM), Immigration Department, and many others responsibility of making sure laws are applied to citizens and institutions. Even though each branch is separated, they depend on each other. The Parliament making law, the executive execute and enforce the law, and and the judiciary interpret the law and was the conflict. Without this cooperation, the legal system cannot function. However, the operation of law in Malaysia also show the importance of balance. For example, if the executive abuse the enforcement powers, the judiciary can step in. If the parliament passed that law that violates constitutional rights, the courts can review it. So, the operation of law is not only making and enforcing rules, it is about maintaining fairness, prevent abuse, and ensure that every branch of a government stay within its constitutional limits. That's all for me.
Thank you, Hannah. Now, let's look at the main institutions involved in our system of the Doctrine of Separation of Powers in Malaysia.
Sure, let me explain. Now, Malaysia's system of government is built in three key institutions, which are the legislature or parliament, the executive, and the judiciary. Let's talk about these three. First off, the legislature or parliament includes the Yang di-Pertuan Agong, the Dewan Negara, and Dewan Rakyat. Its core functions include enacting federal legislation, overseeing national expenditure, and scrutinizing the executive through debates, committee inquiries, and parliamentary questions. Second, we have the executive, which is basically the government. This consists of the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and the Border Civil Service. The executive is responsible for implementing laws, formulating public policies, and managing the day-to-day administrations of the country. Thirdly, the judiciary, also known as courts. We're talking about federal court, court of appeal, and high courts. Their job is to interpret the law, deliver justice, and make sure the government does not abuse this power. And that's all about the three key institutions. Now, let's move on to the next topic, which is the effectiveness. There are strengths and there are weaknesses. Let's see the both of it. The strengths are that the judicial independence has improved. Parliament can challenge the executive, and the constitution clearly separates the roles of each branch. But as for the weaknesses, the executive is too dominant. Cabinet ministries are also MPs, which causes overlap, and judicial review has limits in certain areas. We can see this in real cases. For example, like the Indira Gandhi case in 2018, which strengthened judicial authority in custody matters. But during 2021 emergency, Parliament's role was reduced, showing how powerful the executive can become. So overall, Malaysians follow the doctrine, but its effectiveness depends on how balanced the three branches are in practice. And that's all for the effectiveness, and that's all for my role. Thank you.
Thank you to all our panelists for the insightful discussion. To sum up, the Doctrine of Separation of Powers in Malaysia ensures that government authority is divided among the legislature, executive, and judiciary. Even though Malaysia practices a modified parliamentary democracy system, but the core principle of checks and balances remains central in maintaining accountability and preventing the concentrations of powers. Overall, these doctrines play an important role in protecting democratic values and ensuring that no single branch can act without limits. Thank you for watching our podcast video, and we hope this discussion has given you a clear understanding of how Malaysian constitutional system works.
Bye-bye.
Bye everyone!